Well, hey, my name is Zach Snyder, and welcome to the Blackbar podcast, episode 4. For those that joined us earlier when we had a bit of technical difficulties, welcome back. Like any good live stream, there are technical issues, and is it really a stream if there's not issues, right? So today, regardless, I am joined by Caleb and Nick. Guys, how we doing?
Doing better now.
I'm holding on by the skin of my teeth. I'm gonna lose my mind.
I hear you, dude.
So on today's episode, we're gonna have three topics today. The first one's gonna be with our first guest, Sharayah Bishop. Oh my gosh, what is not church music is what we'll be talking about with Sharayah today. Beyond that, we'll be talking about how to pick the right font for the job, and then also the final one will be how to make more church ads that don't suck. Again, the 2023 edition. So, of course, if we talk about anything today as far as content creation, marketing, anything like that, and your organization needs help, we can always help you with that. Blackbar, our media agency side of things, you can be found at blk.bar. Definitely check that out. And of course, if you're part of our Discord community or you want to be part of our online community, check out discord.blk.bar. So, guys, we're going to go right into it today because we're making up for lost time after those issues. Today,
Amen,
I am happy and excited to announce Sharayah Bishop. Sharayah, can you hear us?
We can hear you. Hooray.
We can hear you. I just want to make sure that everybody else can hear you real quick. If everybody else listening can, Sharayah, just talk for me real quick.
Can you guys hear me? Hello.
I think it's there. I think we should be good.
Okay.
All right, cool.
All right, we're going to lean into it. So, guys, we have Sharayah audio only today. So you'll just have to enjoy our amazing voices. We can try and do some, we can mouth for her, but that may not look the most normal.
It's not good.
So Sharayah, so she is the creative arts and worship pastor at Lifehouse Church in Hagerstown, Maryland, which is the church where I do everything that I do. She's been in ministry her whole life. She says from what, Sharayah? From the moment you were born, essentially?
Yeah, I was born on a Tuesday and I was in church on Sunday. So I'm a pastor's kid, so my parents were pastors. They didn't take a Sunday off, unfortunately.
I'm a little offended you didn't make it to Wednesday night service.
I'm a slacker, really.
So beyond being in ministry her whole life, Sharayah has experience in vocational ministry for about the past 8 years or so. And she's been involved in multiple roles. Sharayah, would you mind giving us like just a little insight into all the things that you've done in the space of vocational ministry?
Oh man, yeah. So I've been worship leading on a volunteer level for probably about 12 years. And then, came onto staff as just, one of the worship directors, one of the worship leaders of one of our campuses. And then, eventually moved into the worship pastor position and now in the creative arts pastor position. So it just has kind of grown from there. So
very cool. And of course, I report to Sharayah, so whenever I do something wrong or right, she can let me know. Yeah. So the reason we brought on Sharayah today is in the Discord. We have one of our members, Aces2 Seesaw 1, that was sharing a conversation about a perspective on music. Their youth ministry was essentially brought over to the main service to do to share some worship one Sunday, and they played a song called "Fake Love" by Elevation Worship. And one of the tensions that he was feeling is that the song is kind of vague, and he was wondering if there is space for vague music in the space of worship, especially when the names of God or the identity of God is not like explicitly stated. His core question is, should we as a church have set guidelines as to what is and what isn't a song that worships the one true God? So, Sharayah, getting right into it, how do you decide in your current position, in the years of experience that you've had within Lifehouse, what music can be part of worship?
Oh man. Yeah, so I think it's first good to note that it's great that we wrestle with these questions. I think it just shows that we care, and that's a really great thing. So I would just encourage everyone to keep asking the questions and keep wrestling with them. And that this is not a new conversation. I mean, these are things that people wrestled with in the early church that Paul was addressing letters to, right? So it's cool that we're still having these conversations. It's good that we care so much. So for us, I think that if I could sum up everything into one sentence, it would be context is everything. because there are different contexts of worship experiences that are trying to accomplish different things. Therefore, we'll probably have different audiences and different people participating in those. So with that said, I think that then there are different contexts of songs that work really well in some of those contexts and songs that don't work so well in some of those contexts. So I think for this, for this song in particular, we have to recognize that Elevation Rhythm is like their youth band as well. So I think like for a youth situation, it makes perfect sense. It's awesome. And I think that going into all of this, kind of prefacing and just saying, if a song works for your church, it works for your church. As long as it is in line with your lead pastor's vision, then do it. And I think that, again, it just really, really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. So for us, I think when picking songs, we really have like a few different categories of where we put songs and then also where our different worship experiences fall into. So obviously worship doesn't just happen on a Sunday morning. It can happen in, life groups and prayer nights and outreach events and nights of worship, different things like that. So for us, first of all, we have a team of people who pick the songs. It's not just on one person, but it's also not like a huge committee either.
Sure.
It's a few entrusted voices that really know our lead pastor and his filters. But the few categories that we put our worship songs and our worship experiences into, I call them personal worship, upper room worship, evangelical worship, and then special songs.
Wow. Yeah.
And then, so for us, just in our context specifically, we place our Sunday morning experience in the evangelical category. So just for the sake of the filters I'm going to talk through, that's where we place ours. Not everyone's Sunday experience is in that same category. Some might put it in the upper room category or whatever. But I think just kind of looking through different songs and different experiences, the personal worship category, this is just between you and the Lord, right? So there's not really a whole lot of filters. You can worship to whatever you want to listen to. But I think some songs end up in this category when they're very like me focused and they're very introspective, very individually focused. A lot of identity songs end up in this category. And for us particularly, we really only pull those songs out when the message specifically is about identity. But for us, a lot of those songs aren't very congregational. So, the whole point of like a group coming together is to sing it together. So we're looking more for we songs instead of me songs. Yeah. So that would be that first category. The next category I call upper room experiences. And that's just kind of referring to, again, that early church in Acts when it was literally an upper room, which implies that it was secluded from other people. It was a select group of already believers coming together to experience the Holy Spirit on a different level. And it was crazy. There were like tongues of fire and all these crazy things that were happening, crazy, beautiful things, but it was a different level with already believers in that room. So for us, I think this would be like prayer nights, even our nights of worship, we've kind of closed to an in-person experience on purpose for this reason. And like I said, so a lot of churches will place their Sunday experience maybe in this category, and that is perfectly fine. Like that works for a lot of churches. But for us, since our Sunday experience is in the next category, we wouldn't do certain songs from this category. And some of those would, I think, include like theologically really deep songs or very specific songs, ones that use a lot of like churchy words and phrases that we might be used to as churched people, but that an unchurched person might be a little confused about or maybe even weirded out by.
Sure.
And then I would say songs that would also go into this would be songs speaking to each other or about God versus directly to him. So there are certain songs that we have made an exception to that one and just saying like, if it's from the perspective of like talking about God for some of the song, we just prioritize making sure that at least in one part of the song, it addresses directly to him. So, and then I would say, coming back to the idea of the names of God, I would actually put in this category songs that use like a lot of the Hebrew names of God without a lot of explanation. Because again, just in recognizing your context, I think for our church specifically, we reside in the United States, and a lot of unchurched people recognize the words God, Jesus, and maybe Holy Spirit.
Sure. Yeah.
But a lot of songs that will just call God like Jehovah the whole song and not really explain that.
Sure.
I've actually had a friend come to me and say that when she first was attending church, she went to a church that sang one of those songs and there wasn't a lot of explanation behind it. She literally thought that she walked in to a church service of a different religion because she was confused. So again, without a lot of that context, so I actually feel that depending on your context, again, if we're getting into the next category, evangelical, when you're thinking of the unchurched lens, I would actually say vague is a little bit better. But again, in your upper room experiences, you can get very specific. So then kind of moving into the evangelical category, this is where we just have a lot of those filters on. And you're saying these situations are geared towards reaching the unchurched. For us, that is our Sunday experience. For other churches, it might be just like outreach events or things like that. So we have done in the past, like I think Touch the Sky by Hillsong United was another example where it never actually addresses God by name. And we had the same caution. So I think it's a very fair caution to have. I think just recognizing again, I would put that in the evangelical category and saying that I think that if we're in the church service and we know who we're talking to, I think that we kind of get the point of it. But then we've also used songs like that very specifically for evangelical settings because they might be more accessible. So in that category, I would just put very accessible songs, easy to understand for an unchurched person. And then the other qualifier in that category is it singable? This is like a really, really big one for us. Is it accessible? Again, is it corporate? Can a person who's not trained musically and can't like to sing very well, can they actually join in with us?
Sure.
Because that's the whole point of coming together. We're not just putting on a performance and being like, look how cool this song is. We want you to join in with us, to sing with us. So is it singable? Meaning, is the melody easy to catch on to? Is it rhythmically too hard? Or the words too fast? Things like that. Those are, I think, big qualifiers for us where we will like not do a song if it's too complicated. And I think that worship teams and creatives can be very tempted into getting bored with songs and with worship music.
Sure.
And I would just really, really challenge us to check our hearts on that, because that's kind of the whole point of congregational worship music. There's a lot of amazing worship music that is very artsy, very complex. And that'd be great for my personal worship. But the whole point of corporate worship songs is to be very easy because they're like sing-alongs. That's like the whole point. So I think for us, it's just a heart check of this is not for our creative fulfillment. It's about involvement with the people. And so as soon as we're getting sick of a song, that's when the congregation is finally catching on to it. So is it singable? Is it accessible? And then the last category, special songs. These would be ones that are meant to be received, not necessarily participated in. So these can break the rules, essentially. Like if we want to do a song that breaks the rules of our filters, we would just categorize it as special. And we would be really intentional about how we craft that, where it happens in the service, instructing people you can remain seated, just receive this song. But again, these are meant to just kind of set up a point, build tension, make an illustration of some sort. So that would be kind of the purpose then of special songs. So that's how I would categorize some things. And I think it's, again, just really good conversations to have and good things to wrestle through for sure.
Ooh, lots to unpack there, certainly.
Yeah.
I know we don't have all day to go through this, but Sharayah, would you mind just one more time going through those 4 categories now that we're on the back end of the explanation?
Yes. So personal worship, upper room worship, evangelical worship, and special songs.
Gotcha. Wow. I mean, I think what I've enjoyed, because as I said, I work with alongside Sharayah and the different teams that are involved in this process. I think what I've enjoyed seeing is that there's so much intentionality that goes into picking the worship music, and I think that's something that I don't have a lot of experience about how other worship teams determine the kind of the arc of their service, but especially as we have a heavy relationship with our lead pastor, making sure we're intentional about sermon series throughout the year, making sure we're intentional about the message, kind of like supporting the core like gospel presentation of the day. That's something that I've always appreciated. For someone who wants to kind of move toward those categorizations, Sharayah, what do you think is a good starting place with getting your teams, whether that's the worship team, the creative team, or coming alongside your lead pastor to start to initiate those kind of categories? Where do you think someone who has not, this is their first time hearing these concepts, where do you think they should start?
I think you should start with your lead pastor. I think ultimately we have to be in line with his or her vision for the church.
Yeah.
And just recognizing you have to be able, and the pastor has to be able to define what experiences are going to accomplish each of those categories, right? Yeah. So if you guys are not aligned with what your Sunday experiences are trying to accomplish, then we're having the same conversation that Paul was having with the church in Corinth, right? Like these were the conversations that they were having and wrestling with. And so ultimately you have to be in line with the lead pastor and recognizing what do they want for their Sunday experience? What do you want from a night of worship? What do you want from a prayer event? And then it ultimately is just teaching that culture. Like once you guys have decided what that is, then it's teaching your worship teams, your creative teams, that culture, and ultimately being like, hey, like, and ultimately not apologizing for it once you guys have heard from the Holy Spirit on that.
Sure. And we're not going to fix this overnight, but we know the stories about our present day church communities who have been ripped apart because someone decided to try to introduce an electric guitar or drums into their worship experience. Like we all are aware of that. Some of us have been a part of that. I'm curious, once your kind of like lead pastor, or even your executive team, if your lead pastor decided to work with a larger inner circle, what do you think is the best way to integrate that in a community that has a variety of backgrounds or theological diversity in it that comes with tension? You know, again, it's the hymn versus the modern contemporary worship debate. Yeah. Like, what is a way to start to move that dot in the right direction?
Again, I feel like you have to know your people and you have to know your region.
Yeah.
So when it comes to like different backgrounds in your communities, whether that's your lead pastor or if you're a multi-site church, your campus pastors, you have to know your people and you have to do the research on your region. Who is in it? What do they struggle with? What are like the big issues that are happening in your city or in your community? And then ultimately then reflecting on that and saying, okay, who do we want in our seats? And then your experience and how you craft it and the songs that you pick are going to reflect that. And you can actually even see this it's really funny. Let's just go back like 10 years ago. Like the big three at the time was like Bethel, Hillsong, and Elevation. Right. And so you could even see the difference in themes and styles that came out of those three areas. And that's within one country. That's within the United States. But such vastly different cultures and then how that reflected in the music. Like Hillsong New York or Hillsong United was out of New York City. They were putting forth a lot of like dark, brooding, like music that was talking about pain a lot and things like that. And that makes sense coming out of New York City. Bethel, their music was very like whimsical, like almost borderline romantic, like, and that was again just coming out of a culture like California where they're like, oh, like everything is chill. We like worship with our like shoes off, you know. And that's like the music that came out of that area. And that's beautiful for them and their culture. And then Elevation in the Carolinas, you know, very like mobilizing anthem songs. So you can see that in just a geographical difference. And so you have to be aware of that within your own community and like what kind of culture surrounds your community, what kind of people do you have, and then ultimately the songs and the filters that you have on those things is going to be heavily affected by that. And you and your pastor and the campus pastors need to be on the same page about it.
Sure.
For sure. Yeah. I'm curious. So this is not quite the same thing as like Sunday morning worship or even Wednesday night worship or anything like that. I can remember I visited a church many, many years ago who absolutely shall remain nameless, where I walked in the front door and they were playing like music in the lobby, like a lot of churches do, and they were playing Pumped Up Kicks, which is like very fun, like happy sounding song about the Columbine shooting.
Oh
right?
my gosh.
That is what the topic of the song is about.
Right.
And so like, I guess I'm personally opposed to having some relatively clean and uplifting secular music in a church service, but I know that's not everybody's opinion. I'm curious, when it comes to music that isn't necessarily playing during the stage, but maybe in the background of an event, pre or post service, do you have different filters for that? Or how would you think about what music to play in those areas?
Yes and no to the filters question.
Okay.
Yes, because I would say, for the exact reason that you just said, theologically and the words, I do have the same filter. If I hear a song, no matter how fun it sounds, if I hear a song that theologically doesn't align with who we are, I'm just kind of like, oh, I don't love that phrase or those words, I will have us take it out of the pre-service playlist. So theologically and words wise, yes, I do have the same filters. I'm also down with secular music as long as it aligns, but outside of that, it doesn't need to be singable. All the other filters can kind of go out the window as long as, again, it accomplishes what you're trying to, again, the environment that you're trying to create. So for us, we've kind of adopted I think it was North Point who originally taught this, but it was like the service funnel, where at the beginning of the experience, the funnel is very wide. It's a wide net. So our pre-service playlists are going to be fun, upbeat songs. And then ultimately the funnel gets narrower, and then you respond at the end. But at post-service music for us, it entirely depends on the day. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the same as the pre-service music, because we're going to leave people with like action steps and mobilizing feelings. But we have playlists set aside for if people are like crying at the front of the stage at the end of the service and the message was heavier than we were expecting, making an audible and saying, hey, go to a mid-level playlist. Or if the sermon is about prayer, we will have a prayer playlist at the end ready for people to respond in that way. So I do think that the pre-service and post-service playlists and for special events and things like that, ultimately they can absolutely change depending on what you want people to feel. You're creating an environment for hearts to be ready to hear what the message is that day. So we do the same thing with Christmas, Easter, watch lists. Like we will create special playlists for those events as well. So yeah.
So Sharayah, we're running a little tight on time, and we're going to make sure to hit a question or two. Nick's got a couple from our audience, if you don't mind, a couple quick fires from the hip here.
All right.
All right. So Steve Zimmerman in our YouTube comments, he asked, is there a need for a scripture base for a worship song?
Yes.
I imagine what he's saying here is like, should a song come from scripture, right? Is there a certain amount of scripture that has to go into a song, or can we like just pull theological ideas? So I guess like this would be the difference between like how he loves us, which is very much, just talking about the love of God and the impact on a person's life, and then maybe like a doxology.
Okay, I'll change my answer. No. For me personally, I think, again, if we're defining worship as like its actual definition, it's anything that brings glory to God. And so obviously I love the Bible. I think a lot of our truths come from scripture because it is God breathed, but I also believe that God can speak to us in our own personal time with him as well. And I don't think that it needs to be directly informed by scripture. He can absolutely speak to us in our own time and as people are writing songs, and that can be just as Holy Spirit inspired. However, I do think that you need to maybe at least compare it to scripture and make sure that the truths that are coming out of you through writing and through songwriting aren't you speaking, but they are actually the Holy Spirit. So I would say that you definitely need to wrestle with those things, with the truth that we find in Scripture. But I don't think that it needs to be always directly from a Scripture reference or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Wow. Nick, did you have any others before we start to close out the conversation here?
Not at the moment, no.
So Sharayah, I have one that, not to land with a heavier one, but I'm trying to help equip our community to best interact with kind of situations. If you get into your lead pastor or your leadership teams establishes the direction from worship, you as the worship leader or worship pastor or worship director is then equipped to go and use that worship for their community. What do you do when you have someone on your team that has tensions with this? What is the space for challenging in an appropriate and healthy way that also doesn't invalidate their own feelings surrounding these kind of worship songs?
Absolutely. So we have a phrase at our church called clarity leads to unity. And I feel like that's one of our most important phrases that we say at our church, because I think that if you are upfront with your church's vision, and then ultimately then how that informs your worship culture with people right off the bat. Like as soon as someone joins the worship team, like at least for us, I have like an entire video on our worship theology and where we stand as a church, so that people know as they're joining the team and they can agree or not agree to join the team based on those values. So I think that first is like teaching your culture to your team and to your church is so vitally important, because then right off the bat, they're not going to be confused later. However, whenever you do come across those conversations, which I have many, many times,
I'm sure.
yes, like you absolutely, like you said, Zach, like you absolutely validate the person's concerns and their feelings, and you hear them out, and you, like I said, wrestle, not kickbox about these things. But wrestling is a good thing. So I think the conversations are needed. I receive the feedback. Ultimately, I try to teach our culture as best as we can. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if people are not aligned with the church's culture, then they have to make those decisions based on that. So I would just say honest conversations, unapologetic conversations, but also genuine ones where you hear people out for sure.
Wow. Awesome. Man, I was like, I don't know how I'd respond to that, but you were ready for it. And Sharayah, thank you so much for working with our technical difficulties today. Before you head out, is there anything that you do on the side that you'd like to share or promote, or anything is a resource that you could share with the community?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. I do have a YouTube page. It is, connected to our church. It's called Lifehouse Creative. On there, I do harmony tutorials, because I found that there's a lot of really great instrumental tutorials that exist out there, but not a lot of great harmony ones. So I try my best to do some harmony tutorials, but I also have like an Enneagram series on there as well. I'm an Enneagram coach, so I love to help people with that. So lots of cool stuff on there if you want to check it out.
Sweet. Well, Sharayah, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much, guys. I've been very honored to be here with you guys.
We're honored to have you. Thank you, Sharayah.
All right, bye.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, guys. That was awesome. Thank you so much for those who responded in the comments. We love that kind of stuff. Please keep that up, especially so that we can bring that content to our guests and in the conversation. Since we shuffled around today's order, Caleb, why don't you take us into segment number 2 then?
Yes. I feel like over the course of that section gave me enough time to cool down from the chaos of fixing all of the problems in the beginning. Thanks, everybody, for sticking with us.
Shout out to Caleb handling the technical components of the stream. Let's go.
I want to make it absolutely clear that in a lot of ways we built this channel on live streaming. I hate managing live streams so much. I hate it so much. But I'm the one doing it. That's fine. That's fine. We're here. Let's talk about not live streaming for a little while everything is not blowing up. We're going to talk about fonts a little bit. Specifically, there was a post that one Brady Scherer made last week or the week before. I can throw it on the screen here about the best fonts for church designs. And he had a bunch of fonts on here, all of which I think are pretty excellent fonts for the situation. And I sort of want to like signal boost these things because everybody needs good fonts. But I feel like there's one thing that was missing from this post, and that's sort of by nature of it being an Instagram gallery post. You cannot say everything that you want to say in there, is deciding when you would use those fonts. So like these are fonts I like is a little bit like a musician saying these are notes that I like. It's like, okay, fantastic, wonderful, but it all depends on the context of what you're using it and what fonts you're using around it and the colors and whatever else. So what I wanted to do today is go through the fonts that he shared and use them as examples to learn a little bit about fonts. And then also figure out, okay, when would this font be a good use case? When would I actually be using this? Like something like a very heavy script font is not something that I'm going to be using for like lyrics that I'm going to be putting on the screen, right? But it could be a good title. So I built out a nice little Illustrator file over here with all of the different fonts that he showed, and all of the sort of variants of it as we go. I just want to take these one by one. So the first font we have here is Swear Display. It's this very like groovy, fun font. Let me make sure I'm gonna stream this for you guys so you can actually see what's going on here too. And
I was going to say, I can't quite see it. That's a great font right there.
Yes.
Look at
Can you guys see that?
Everybody, I can't.
Everybody sees. Steve Zimmerman. We are not going to be talking about Comic Sans today. It is not going to come up.
But it just did. There you go. You got it.
Okay. So Swear Display is a really fascinating font, and it has something really interesting about it, which is what it calls a Silati version of the thing, which is just italic backwards. But it has three different versions, really? Sort of the normal Roman version, italic, and then Sitali. So I did want to mention real quick, something fun that we can learn about fonts with this one, actually, is that not all fonts have italic versions built into them. There's something called an italic font, and then there's an oblique font. An oblique font is the equivalent of taking the totally normal Roman version, is what it's called, the one that's sort of standing up straight, and then just tilting it to the side a little bit. That's usually considered like a typographical faux pas. You want to avoid it for the most part, and you want to stick with actual versions of the font that were meant to be tilted to the side like that. There's going to be some elements of the geometry that just don't work very well if you just force it off to the side. That's why type designers make italic versions of their font, because it works better that way. You can see even here, like the P of the Roman version versus the P of the italic version are completely different. It's much more scripty. And for this font specifically, what makes it interesting, they have the Silati version, which is like, italic on steroids. Well, they'll take all of the sort of fun swooshes and whatnot that they're adding and make them way more extreme, way more groovy. And this is the version of the font specifically that Brady Scherer talked about, saying that, it's worth using. It's similar actually a lot to the font that Zach has on his shirt right now. It's very groovy. It's exciting.
No, wait. That's part of my, that's what I'm bringing. Don't spoil it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So something like this is absolutely not going to be something that you're writing lots of text in. This is not a body text. This is absolutely like a title, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But it's very fun personality. This would be something that I'm using to promote like maybe a summary event where there's going to be a lot of fun music, personality, exciting, maybe an evangelistic sort of thing. That's sort of when I would use a font like this.
Listen, I'm still just mind blown that Silati is italic backwards.
Yes. I would honestly, I would not have picked that up. Brady actually mentioned in his post. So I was like, what is Silati? I've never seen that.
There you go.
I do like the vibe of that font though. And I love that there's a more professional version and there's a more fun version all in that same like font package.
Yeah.
Right. And you can sort of mix them together. Yeah.
Cool.
Having that versatility must be really great.
Right. The next font I want to talk about next font that Brady mentioned is Forma DJR. So Forma DJR is interesting because it's meant to be, it's sort of an adaptation of a font that was invented many, many years ago, which is almost all of these fonts. They're usually old fonts that are sort of being reborn. What's interesting is this is modeled after actual letter presses, where the actual metal thing, you ink it up and then you push it down on the paper, which is why all the corners of these letters are all a little curved, right? It doesn't go to straight edges and whatnot. But cool. This is very much a Helvetica-esque font. It's in that same.
This is giving Helvetica.
But it's because of those little imperfections and on these bits, and even you can see the tall letters. They're almost curved in a little bit. It makes it a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more fun. But the interesting, fun, unique thing I want to talk about with this font is that we can see right here. This is Forma DJR Display, and Forma DJR has several other versions. Forma DJR Text and Forma DJR Micro. Those words are they're communicating things about when the font is supposed to be used. So for this example, Forma DJR's Display is a display font. And display fonts, if you ever see that in the title of a font, are meant to be titles. They're meant to be big, bold at the top of the screen. They're not usually very good for being very small on the screen. And you can even see right now on my screen, the very finest version of these fonts are starting to disappear as they're smaller on the screen.
Yes.
As opposed to, when I scroll down a little bit, the Forma DJR Text or the Micro are already going to be showing up a little bit better because they're intended to be better used at either. The text one is usually as small as fonts go. I've never seen a Micro before. I think that's also a unique thing about this font set. It's intended, I imagine, this for more subtitles or fine text at the bottom of the screen. I think another good example, I'll go back to Swear. Swear has a display version. It'd be the same thing. All of these are title fonts, right? These are not text fonts. However, there is another version of Swear called Swear Text that has the same DNA as the Swear display, but is much easier to read. It'll have a more consistent line weight. It'll be a little bit easier on the eye. So if I sort of compare these two side by side right here, you can see even I'm looking at these two S's specifically. There's way more variation in the weight of this top one because it's going to be bigger. It's easier to see those things. But when it's smaller, you want the consistency, so it's easier for legibility. So when you're picking a font for a title, you're looking for a display font usually. Usually you can get away with a bit more personality. And something like Text and Micro are a little. So we're learning something. We're learning about fonts. Something like this font is an extremely versatile font. It is a sans serif, so you're going to use it most anywhere. It's not brimming with personality or anything, which is a lot of what Helvetica's appeal is. Sure. So you could use it in a number of different situations, and it's all going to be fine. I would say in general, like I mentioned earlier, it's a little friendlier than Helvetica. It feels maybe a little bit more organic than loud or anything like that. So it's good font. Brady has good taste in fonts, that's for sure. I want to talk about these next three fonts, all in sort of a category here,
like a sequence.
Yes. Okay. So these fonts are all the three serif fonts that he wanted to talk about. And if you're not super familiar with the language of what a serif is or what a sans serif is, serif fonts have these little doobly-doos that stick out. That's the technical term.
Is that the official term, the technological term?
Yeah. Actually, these are just called serifs. That's what they are. And a sans serif font doesn't have those, right? It's very straight edge.
Oh, excuse me. I need you to use the correct terminology.
Yeah, they don't have any doobly-doos on the font. So that's how you know if you're using a serif and sans serif font. And most people, when they think of sans serif fonts, they're usually just thinking, I want to communicate this as official, that it's older, maybe, that it's vintage, maybe that it's a little bit more high class. And I think these are great fonts to show there is a ton of diversity and personality that you can have in serif fonts, and I don't want people to be afraid of using them. There are plenty of good options that can communicate all these different areas. So the first one being Mackinac. This one is way more relaxed of a thing. I think Brady said specifically for when you need a serif font that isn't stuffy, which I think is a great way of putting it. It feels much more friendly. It has, even all of the serifs have very rounded corners there, which make it, the doobly-doos have rounded corners. So this is something that I would feel comfortable using in a church logo or something, because it may communicate something about the atmosphere of the church, but it still doesn't feel very
like professional
cold.
but approachable.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
As opposed to this next font, Masqualero. I'm totally guessing how to pronounce that, but that's what I'm going to go with. This one does feel way more like almost fashionable, I would say. This one feels sharp.
I feel like this is like
modern.
This is like a high-end fashion brand in Spain.
Yes. Yes.
It's not Dido, but it's
right. It feels expensive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is something that I'm not using in like a kids ministry font, right? Or, like this is something maybe that I'm like, I don't know, that might be aimed more at an older generation, even a younger generation, if it's the right event. You know, I like to think of fonts as sort of the nonverbal communication of what you're saying. It doesn't matter what you're writing. What is how you are saying it say about what you're saying, right?
Yep.
Exactly.
And I really do just want to now see that used for a children's ministry. And now that you said that it should not be, I just want to see it done.
I mean,
excuse me, could I have my milk, please? Okay,
I'll let you do it. The last one here is Belly, which is this really interesting.
This is weird.
It is a weird font. It took me a minute to sort of like warm up to it a little bit. It also interestingly has a Roman version, which is a little bit more toned down. It has a proper italic version, right, as opposed to the oblique version, and it has the display version, which is like this really, it very angular.
It's almost really like geometric.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. To me, it almost feels like a parody of a really swanky. Almost like a font like this, you know, it has way more personality. It's almost like ready to have fun with itself. So this might be something if you want to do maybe slightly more kids, you know, I can imagine this being, especially in the youth. I feel like this font would be something good as a display. I mean, it's
Zachary Snyder. Of course, it's ready to have fun. You know,
right. But again, something like this, it has a display version, and then it has a Roman and italic when you need to more fill up like the body of text. One thing
you said one potential use case. Do you have any other use cases that you could think of off the hand of what to do with something like this, a belly font?
Yeah, I think of like I've done some marketing for church events that are more like a gala or more like a dance, depending on the denomination of your church or something like this. Something more fun. I could see something like this working of like having that air of maybe a little fancier, but it still is fun. You know what I mean?
Like a business casual kind of dance.
Exactly. Yeah. One thing I also wanted to talk about with these that I think most people just don't know fonts have are extra glyphs. So this is something that I know you can do in Illustrator, but it's also available in Photoshop and plenty of other programs. In Illustrator specifically, if you go to Window, Type, and then Glyphs, you can see basically every single character that is inside this font package. And certainly there's A through Z, 1 through 0, all that kind of stuff. But most really good fonts will have a bunch of other stuff. So this one has like fractions that are built into it. It has these different the suits in cards. It has an omega symbol. It has a pi symbol. Exactly. It has definitely a bunch of other different language characters. It also has one of these. I forget what that's called, but that's a Christ thing. I thought that was interesting.
Well, no, that's the that's the Constantine cross that you saw in the sky.
Yes, I forget what it's called. I made a whole video about it that I forget the name of it.
Someone in the comments will let us know.
Right. Yeah. So whenever you're playing with a font, I think it's worth it to sort of dive into what some of those extra characters are and see if you can use them in your work. And with a lot of these, I found in this one has several other characters that you could use almost as flourishes and whatnot that still match the vibe and use similar geometry to what the original font is. So if you're looking for extra stuff like that, check to the glyphs, see if there's any things that are
So,
sort
Caleb,
of built into the font.
I have a quick kind of glyph alternate character question. I've used fonts in the past in which their default number, for example, doesn't sit on kind of the same line as the text.
Yes.
And I can even see in this little glyph package, there's large numbers and there's small numbers. Is there a way to default it to one or the other if it defaults to one that you don't love compared to one of the other glyphs that you see in a package?
For sure. So when you're looking through the glyphs thing, there are definitely a bunch of different numbers, and I could type this number 1, or I could type this number 1, or I could type this number 1, which apparently is basically the same number 1. But another way that you can do that, and this works for numbers and letters, if at least in Illustrator, if you highlight a number or a letter or anything, down here will be all of the alternatives for this number. So you could do the superscript version of it. You can do the lower version. Also, any of these, the actual letters themselves will often have multiple versions. This is very important. We don't have any examples in the fonts that Brady picked, but for script fonts, often there will be 4 or 5 different letter lowercase e's or capital C's or whatever, so that if you have a script thing that you want to make look like handwriting, but it has like 4 e's and they look exactly the same, that doesn't necessarily come off of organic. So you could just change it per one and it makes it feel more organic and real or whatever. So this is absolutely a sign of a good font when it has a lot of good glyphs and a lot of alternate characters and whatnot. So
what's that font called again?
This was Masqualero. We've got Belly and Mackinac as the serif choices that Brady talked about today.
Love it. Well, Caleb, what else you got for us?
We got P22 Underground. P22 Underground is modeled after the London Underground font. The London Underground font is sort of like a in the world of typography, it's sort of this famous example. There is an actual font called Johnston that was based off of it, but some people, like the designers of P22 Underground, thought that they took too many creative liberties, and P22 Underground was closer to the original. That's what they're saying. You don't really need to know any of that. This is once again a sans serif. This is what's called a humanist sans serif. You can usually tell by the G's and the A's, as opposed to like a Helvetica G, or probably even like a Forma Display G. They've got like a bit of a fancier, like the fancy one that squiggles around and whatnot. These humanist sans are supposed to be like emulating what a serif, like the organic feeling and the almost hand-drawn feeling of a serif font, but without the serifs, is sort of the goal of something like that.
I feel like I feel like I could see this font used in like, a train system in like New York or something like that, or like at a bus stop. Like this just feels like a really accessible yet professional, approachable font.
This font was designed, well, the original font at least was designed to be used in the London Underground to be very clearly readable from very far away, so you can be able to tell where you're going and whatnot. The interesting thing about fonts that I want to talk with this one, which is interesting, you see there is a Roman version of the font with uppercase and lowercase. Then we have a small caps version of the font, and we have a petite caps version of the font, which I have never seen a petite caps. The difference between these two being the height of the letters. You can see the petite, the small caps are even smaller than the small cap. But I do want to talk about small caps specifically because there are some font sets like this one that have small caps built into them. And then there are other fonts where it's not built in and you fake it, more or less. So we can see right here, have P22 Underground, and I'm going to put this in Helvetica Bold, which does not have small caps built in, and I can fake it in Illustrator and put it in small caps. This is also another typographical faux pas. Fake small caps alter the weight of the small caps. So you can see in here where the U, the weight of the U here being about this, and the N are exactly the same, even though this letter is smaller. As opposed to here, the U here is this, and then it gets way later down here.
Significantly different.
This is a fake small cap, and generally you'll want to avoid these things. Now you can cheated a little bit. I'm not necessarily suggesting you do this all the time by taking your small caps and bumping it up to like a heavier version of the font. And this sort of like gets around if you have that option. I've done that before. But generally speaking, you only want to use small caps when it actually has it built in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Caleb, while we're there, like the quick 1 minute version, why would you use small caps?
Yeah, so there are some people who believe they get the feeling whenever they see all caps that they're being screamed at for one reason or another.
Yeah,
Small caps is a good way of using those characters without necessarily communicating that same feeling. I also use it quite a bit if you are designing something that you're like working in a very like tight space, or you're stacking words on top of each other. Things like ascenders or descenders here can often, like if I want to put a tiny little subtitle right here, all of a sudden this D is just screwing everything up. So I can switch it over to small caps, and then none of them have ascenders or descenders, and I can fit stuff really tight above and below.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, you got one more for us?
I got one more for you. Brandon Grotesque.
Oh, why do we hating on Brandon?
So Brandon Grotesque
got Nick on that one.
supposedly is one of Brady's favorite fonts. I am not huge on this font. I don't personally. It's a very popular font. It's bouncing around a lot. I don't find it all that interesting. I do think it has a lot of fun personality. A lot of the bolder versions feels like very much perfect kids font logo to me. It feels like very humanistic, all that kind of stuff. This is a geometric font. So as opposed to something like Underground, that is more of that humanistic thing where it's more copying like serif fonts and trying to add that personality in. A geometric font is very much about getting like very pure shapes, straight lines, circles. Futura is like the most obvious example of something like this. Generally, they feel very modern and whatnot. The actual first name for these kinds of fonts was Grotesque. And I had to look this up because I did not know it, because that seems like a terrible way to name a font. Way back in the day, in the 19th century, so the 1800s, pretty much the only type of font that was used were serif fonts, because they thought, especially in advertising, that it made your product look fancier, made it look more whatever. And to use a sans serif font was perceived as like making your thing look cheap. It made it look gross. It made it look grotesque. So the font makers actually used that and like sort of took the phrase back and turned it into, we are a grotesque font. This is a family of fonts now that sort of became known as sort of like a geometric sans serif, that kind of thing, which I think is really interesting. The one thing that I want to talk about with this font that it doesn't have a ton of, but it's something important to note. If you've ever been typing with a font, this happens a lot in script fonts, and you type, for example, like an F and like an I right next to it, and then the crossbar of the F messes with the dot of the I, and it just starts to look ugly, like the font is collapsing on itself. A good font, generally speaking, will have what are called ligatures, and ligatures are alternative font combinations, letter combinations, for when bad stuff ends up happening. So for this one specifically, I know that it has a ligature of an F right next to an F. So if I zoom in here and I delete some of this and I type F and I type another one, you see how it adjusts the first letter, and they become a single character that is combined with one crossbar all the way across the board.
Very cool.
There's only like 3 or 4 in Brandon Grotesque. A lot of fonts will have tons of them. But if you're finding that you've got a lot of weird collisions and stuff, it's worth, selecting a couple letters and seeing if there are some alternative ligatures that you could use to make the font feel more cohesive and consistent. Very cool. I do think, as much as Brandon Grotesque is not my favorite font in the world, it is a very versatile font. I do think it does feel much younger. It has more personality, so I would use it more in youth stuff than in older stuff. But so hopefully that was a crash course on a bunch of stuff you could take away on a bunch of different fonts and whatnot. I obviously, you can probably tell, live for fonts, and I'm definitely a font snob. But I was curious. I know Zach mentioned it before. How I want to round out this section is maybe talk about what our favorite fonts are and where you use them, or how you would suggest using them.
Nick, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I can. So there's this font that we've actually been using for a couple different clients for Blackbar that we've been working with. It's DDC Hardware. And the reason why I love this one, because it's kind of it's actually a font that I've been aware of for, probably like 6 or 7 years. It's made by, dang, Caleb, I'm forgetting the name. Yes, Draplin.
Aaron Draplin.
Aaron Draplin, who Caleb and I actually got to meet way back in the day up in Traverse City. It was awesome. But like the reason why I love it is because we've been using it for a lot of different things, but particularly in my field, I've been using it as subtitles for our videos, right? And so like these subtitles, we talked about capital letters sounding like you're yelling at people, right? But what I've also found is this may be perhaps not the most professional thing, I suppose, but when it comes for like spelling things and specifically getting things right in terms of capitals, it's been super easy and helped our workflow actually speed up, where we don't have to necessarily worry, like, if we're quoting scripture, is this a capital H or is this a lowercase h, right?
There is no lowercase version of the font, to be clear. Like that's why it's good for that kind of thing.
Yeah. But other than that, it's incredibly readable in the vertical video format. And it has, I believe it's either a condensed or a compressed, or it might have both of those versions.
Yeah, go back
condensed and compressed. And
I am loving, go back to that last image.
Let me put it back on the screen.
I'm loving those diagonal fractions. I don't know if I've seen that before in a font.
They're very cool.
Font family. That's very interesting.
It's
665.
He's gonna make good stuff, right? Yeah.
Ignore the 6. Yeah, the triple 6s.
But yeah, that's why I love it. It looks really good on a vertical video format for subtitles on video specifically.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Zach, what do you got?
So then mine, shout out to Megan and Lindsay in the comments. We talk a lot about design and fonts at Lifehouse. Tan Nimbus is one that we've recently used. We primarily used it for our Limitless Women's Ministry. It's our designer kind of helped us find it, and ever since we've kind of really been attached to just kind of the vibe that it is. It's like a really bold display font. It's clean, but it also has these like retro psychedelic feels. It feels like trendy, and like, I mean, even I think at some of those images you've got it being used in like some kind of more professional settings. It just kind of has a cool energy to it, and that's why I was hiding my shirt earlier. Here, I'll move my mic out of the way.
Hard to steal your thunder there.
Yeah, I know. It looks great. I love how it's a psychedelic kind of like font too. It reminds me a little bit of like 1970s hippie movement kind of fonts and stuff.
Yeah, but it's not like dirty, it's not unkempt. It's like really, really clean on all of its edges, but also it still has this playful element to it. And Caleb was saying the very first font that you pulled up in your presentation there, Caleb, similar looks to it. Would you mind pulling that one back up? We can like just take a look at the swear. Oh, thank you. Like even like that's got some similar energy to it. Definitely different uses, but I don't know. I feel like these kind of fonts they're like really trending right now. They're really accessible. They're like youthful. You see a lot of younger designers using this, and I don't know. It's just a cool take. Now, of course, like I said, it's a display font, so I would not use this. Like you can look right there. Don't do that. Don't do a big old paragraph using this, because that's not what it's for. But for like larger stuff, like scroll down to the next image, Caleb. That one's also interesting because I don't know if I love this design, but it is fun to see the font used in a couple different ways within the context of a few different designs. So that's what I got.
This font, I've been listening to basically nothing but the Grateful Dead for the past week or so, and this font feels like how they sound.
The Grateful Dead. I can feel it.
The font that I want to talk about is not a font that is probably new to anybody, but it is one that is near and dear to my heart, and that is Futura. I use this very often.
I was expecting some like mind-blowing dynamic font, and then he brings Futura to the party.
I miss the font snob, and this is one of the best of the world, and you can't stop me. It's a geometric sans serif font, so it feels very modern. It feels very like forward, even though it was designed in 1927. It still managed to hold relevance and is used all over the place today. It has very, very heavy versions, very, very light versions. There are 9 different condensed versions of it, and there have been so many companies that have taken this font and done their own tweaks to it and everything. The PT version, I forget is the name of the code. A Paratype is my favorite version.
That's it.
Yeah. I just love this font, and everybody should have it on their computer. Don't steal it.
Yeah.
But you should have it on your computers.
It's interesting, Caleb, because if I recall correctly, and I don't know if it's the same currently because they could have changed it, but this is the font that we chose for the rebrand when we did the last rebrand at Grand Rapids First. Isn't that correct?
That is.
Yeah.
It's a good font.
Nice.
It
is very clean. It's very clean. I mean, I understand why you like it so much. It's just a full, like, professional accessible font. Really
Right.
It's interesting. You picked Futura because, as you said, and I agree with you, it's absolutely a wonderful font. But we also have a comment in the down in our YouTube comments talking about
I'm saying
Helvetica,
it. Yes,
which is hilarious because if I
can
pull the curtain back a little bit,
not to talk about Helvetica
or Gotham
or
and Helvetica.
Yeah, Gotham was also off the list.
Yeah, definitely we could not mention it. I just find it hilarious because it's like
I picked the third one.
I know, right?
The next one on the
list. If there was a third on that list, you're 100% right. It would have been Futura.
Yeah,
that's fine. That's fine.
Oh man,
I love it. Thank you so much, Caleb. Let's go ahead and transition into our last topic. Nick's gonna cue it up for us today. What we got, buddy?
Yeah, so let me pull up my notes. I actually wrote them down,
and we'll pay attention to the screen here in a minute.
So as you guys have noticed, the title of today's podcast is how to make more church ads that don't suck. Again, if you're not familiar with the Blackbar podcast and the Blackbar YouTube channel, our very first video that we ever made.
And welcome.
Yes. Yeah. Well, welcome first. But the very first video that we made was about how to make church ads that don't suck. Now, the idea behind it is that, oh gosh, how many years ago? I'm going to have to do math real quick. I think it was 4 years ago at this point.
3 years ago.
I think
we're
it was 2019,
approaching 4.
actually. When we posted
oh, you're right.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, there's something.
I have to go check. Anyway,
Anyway.
It was far enough back where we were talking about, oh, hey, look, it's Caleb. What is he saying? Hi, I'm Caleb, and this is the Blackbar YouTube channel.
I look like
check how cool. I know, like the beard is not yet there.
No,
at least back then.
No,
but
we're not gonna. I'm taking that down.
But essentially, we wanted to talk about how different church ads aren't necessarily living up to the same standard that other companies are using in marketing. And I think it's a theme that we've said a lot on this channel, that essentially, this is the way I would put it, often church media is about 10 years behind what we see in the quote unquote secular world. And so that was our attempt to hopefully help our audience learn some new techniques, not be afraid of the word marketing when it comes to church media. And I think it did pretty well. But after 3-4 years, I think it's about time that we update some of those things. Essentially, what we talked about in the video, we talked about the importance of brainstorming in the same way that you wouldn't bring a pastor to a pulpit without having some time before, perhaps praying, preparing the message, doing research. The same thing we should be doing as teams. We should be brainstorming the ideas rather than saying, hey, here's a thing, let's make a flyer, right? We also we emphasize the importance that you're fighting for attention in that video, and not necessarily attention from the churches down the street, but more specifically from other advertisements that are out there. If you think about all the different billboards on the road, right? If you have one billboard on the road, you're fighting not against the church down the street for attention. You're fighting the billboard that's about, hey, McDonald's is on exit 55. Make sure you pull over and buy our food, right?
McDonald's church.
Why not both? But Moreover, some of the things I think that are a little more important, equal, the other previous things are definitely important, but these are the things we really wanted people to walk away from, is you shouldn't be just telling people, sell, don't tell. It's our job as marketers to sell an event for people to go to. It's very easy for us to tell people what it is or how they can attend an event. It's more important for us to convince them that it's something they want to attend. We also go through our 3 questions. In brief, they are: who are your audience?
Yep.
What makes... I'm so sorry. I totally
what do you want them to
this
feel?
Apart. Yes, I was about to say the third one, and the order is really important, right? Who's your audience? What do you want to feel? And then what makes you different? Or the way we've updated it is, why should they care? And the importance there being, why should someone care is a better question for us to answer and trying to get us into the mindset of our audience. So again, who's your audience? What do you want them to feel? And why should they care? Now, so many years have gone by, guys, right? I want to know from you guys, after hearing what we talked about in the previous episode, what do you guys want to bring into this message that is important enough that our audience needs to hear now, 2023, opposed to 2020?
You know what? I feel like, Nick, you set me up pretty well, so I'll go ahead and start it off. I think those big central questions: who is your audience? What do you want them to feel? And then why should they care? It's really, we've talked so much about how to identify your audience. We've talked about how that connects to the feeling. I think one of the hardest things for people to get their minds around, especially like I use the terminology client ministry. So if I, as the creative marketing team, is helping promote something from a ministry department, I'm helping them ask these questions. And for someone who doesn't have the mentality of this marketing mindset, that last question is hard sometimes. It's like, what do you mean? Why should they care? Like, I'm doing this outreach. Of course they want to be involved. But there's an extra element to it. And something that I've kind of like observed lately on social media, I really like this kind of pairing of words. It's called the BCQ, or the big central question. Okay. A normal phrase that you could also substitute is the hook. What is the hook of the content or the event, the stuff that you're making that will bring people in? Like, if you are able to answer those 3 questions properly, you figured out how to make your product what it needs to be. You figured out what you need people to get from this, or you figured out what you want to offer people. Sometimes when people see the content you're creating, they don't feel what the hook is. They don't have any idea. Like if I said Limitless, which is what the tan nimbus, what we use that as the logo for, if I said Limitless by itself, that might not have any context to the person that's on the street that's walking by that we know needs to be at that event. So again, asking what is the hook of what I'm creating is massively important. For a digital audience, we have to move our hook away from selling toward adding value. We talked a couple weeks back about social media versus consumption media. The BCQ is a way to let your audience know what they will get away from interacting with your content, and it will also bring them further into the content that you're creating that helps benefit their lives. So it doesn't just, we're not just stopping to scroll. We're also helping people understand, if I'm going to engage with this, if I'm going to, let's make it really relevant, if I'm going to go to this church, what is going to be relevant and matter to my life? And then how is what I'm seeing delivering that information to me? Because if people don't understand what they're going to get away from spending time, like going to a church service, if they think church is a waste of time, what is the way that you're telling them that that's not the case? Or what is the questioning that you're helping them ask that's saying, you know what, for the first time, this is making me think that this could be beneficial to me. And I think that's something that's massive for us. And one of the, we understand one of the not the disqualifiers. One of the things that make it hard to talk about marketing in the church is it feels so non-human. But the reality is that this is a tool that helps us to interact with people in a very personal way. So how is your hook helping reinforce your central message? And one of the things that we've talked about, again, previous episodes on the podcast, previous videos, we've talked about the big purple cow. Caleb, who's the author that wrote that book? Do you remember offhand?
You're gonna ask me on the spot like this?
Oh, man. Hold on.
Seth Godin. Seth Godin.
Yeah.
Seth Godin.
I got his book right behind me.
Yeah.
I love it. So Seth Godin, he talks about the big purple cow. What is the thing that is going to stick out in someone's mind that is going to make that thing be present? So like I can think of, there's this local organization. They have a jingle. I have never used their service, but I remember their jingle is 800-588-2300 Empire Today.
Right.
I know, like that's stuck in my mind, and I remember the commercial exactly what it is, and I know I'll never use it, but there's a hook that brought me in enough that I know their jingle, which is massive for a brand. And the BCQ really is helping us expound upon the third point of why people should care, which is very often the one that, like I said, people have a hard time asking. We have to figure out what is the one big thing that your audience needs to come away with. If you're watching one of our videos, what is the one big thing that we want you, our audience, to resonate with? If you can identify that one big thing and your audience can also identify that one big thing, that's that sweet spot where what you offer your audience is going to be so much more effective.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of what you're talking about here sort of parallels with a thought. I know I've used this a lot of times where clarity beats creativity every time, right? That you were talking about the name of the women's event. What was that?
Limitless.
Limitless, right? Cool name. It's a movie, right? If I remember correctly. That could be a dozen different things. Limitless. It's a very creative name. It does not tell me what this is, right? So making sure very big, if not just as big, women's conference or whatever it actually is, needs to be visible, right? Yeah. I think we try to be clever and assume that everybody is sort of in on the joke or has already heard of Limitless, using that as an example.
It's that curse of knowledge, right?
Where you have to, nobody knows what you're talking about. And I know you try to be super clever and trendy and you could have the coolest ad in the world, but if nobody shows up, that's on your fault. It's not their fault, right? Making sure this is another reason why focus groups are really great. Having someone in your target market to be able to show this content to and make sure that it's actually resonating with them. But clarity always beats creativity every single time.
I got one final statement, then we'll keep it moving just so we don't dwell too long on this. But the other thing about your BCQ is make sure your audience actually cares about what you're bringing, that you're not just not making up nonsense, you're not just repeating common knowledge, or that you're not just giving them stuff that they already have easy access to. Is what you're providing to them genuinely unique, beneficial? Is it helpful? Like those are the kind of things that you got to be asking. So BCQ, master your hook. That's mine.
For sure.
Yeah, man. I love how what you're talking about is even something that we've been trying to implement on our own content and stuff. And something that like over the past couple of years has really just through the experience of working in the marketing field, I've come to find is, as important as the final product, the preparation before, is the understanding of the communication cycle, right? In a brief 10,000 foot, we're talking about the communication cycle is essentially you have a communicator who sends a message, right? And then this message is sent through a medium, which gets received by a receiver, would you believe it? And then it gets to the person who is intended to hear it. And what happens a lot through this process is that original message changes in shape, right? And at the very end, when it gets received by the individuals who's the intended audience is for, a lot of times that message is very different from the original intent. And one of the things I think is our job as marketers, as communicators, is to understand how that message gets changed, right? And so to put it very within our church world, right, there is a incredible difference. I will emphasize this again, and a huge difference between telling someone Jesus loves you and you're going to hell, right?
Right.
And those are perhaps that message is coming from the same place, right? But the way someone hears that could be two different interpretations, right? And so as marketers, we need to be aware how that message is traveling through what mediums to the person who's an intended audience, and not necessarily what we're trying to say, but what are they going to hear when they get that message.
Yeah.
Right. Most definitely. Oof. I think that even like when you're talking about speaking through a medium, an illustration that's coming to my mind is like trying to talk to someone underwater, right? And you might be saying exactly what you intend, but water does what water does and garbles the snot out of it. And someone on the other end, like playing a really awful, hard to play game of telephone is not always going to get it. So again, like ensuring obviously clarity, but taking into account the perspectives, the worldviews, the platforms that the other person is on as you're communicating. Another great use case for focus groups, I think is just going to ensure that the money and the time that you spend on your materials, could be the greatest message ever told. If they don't receive it, that's not on them. That's on you.
I don't know if you guys have seen this video that's currently circulating.
I forgot
from the youth pastor, where they basically a podcast where they get a bunch of different stories from youth pastors.
I
forget.
I don't want to.
Can one of you look up the name of the podcast just so that we credit them properly?
I will look if you want to.
While you look that up, so basically, one of the stories is that the big speaker during the sensitive moment of the service. This is like some kind of youth event, like the altar call moment. He was inviting the audience into repeating the phrase "Daddy God, fill me." And for those that aren't aware of what that means, I'm not going to go into details, but Daddy God is not just used for, an Abba, a father. It's also used in more of a, sexual sense. So you can kind of draw the implications out from there. They ended up playing an audio clip as well that had him repeating that over and over and over again.
Daddy,
and
please fill me, is what he said.
We just need to clip Nick just saying that. That's
our first social media post.
That's our first social media post.
That.
But the point being is that there was a very clear and truthfully, fully authentic. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that this guy was fully authentic about what he was trying to do. However, in the context of our society and our culture, that is a phrase that should not be paired with the objective that he was trying to do. No, and that's, you have to understand the medium. I mean,
right.
Yeah. And that message might have been appropriate for the audience he was with at the time, but they put that on a different platform to like YouTube or wherever they were streaming.
I would say,
and that opened it up.
Yeah, I would say, I would go and I would bet there were people that were impacted in a positive way.
Oh, for sure.
So
Most
absolutely.
Yeah.
However, asterisk.
Yes.
Don't say that phrase. Don't say that.
Also,
if Greg is watching, don't use that phrase on one of your sermons.
I think Greg.
Shout out to our certified pros.
The account is Youth Group Chronicles, by the way.
There you go.
Amazing. Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Caleb, what about you?
We got one more marketing tip today. And this one is a bit of maybe a tough pill to swallow, depending on who you are. I know I have had these conversations before, and they're never fun. But sometimes if you have an event and you market the snot out of it and it's not as successful as you would like, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it maybe isn't the marketing that is the problem. Sometimes it's the product. Certainly there are times when we do not do a good job of marketing the event. We might have missed the mark on how we communicate to them. We might have not been communicating in the right places, on the right platforms, whatever. But sometimes you are very, very confident that you got the message in front of the right people. Perhaps even you communicated in a way that they need to hear, and it didn't hook them. It was not interesting. And I've definitely been in a situation on the receiving end before. It's like, okay, nobody showed up. So you're the marketing guy. Like, obviously you didn't do your job. Well, maybe the actual core of the event, the hook of the event, whatever it was not appealing to the audience. And again, this I keep mentioning focus groups because I think they're a great idea to actually speak to the people you're trying to get to show up. But this is an example of where it would be a good idea to have a focus group during the planning of the event or the building the product way ahead of time before marketing is even getting involved, although marketing should be involved early, and making sure that the event that you're throwing is actually resonating with the audience. I also think along the same note, people try to get around this by doing they'll like mask it. So we'll have like a men's breakfast, which is, you know, quantifiably the most boring possible church event that ever existed. I don't care what anybody said. And I am right in the target demographic. So you can hate me for that. That's just true. You can have a men's breakfast. I don't care. The last thing I want to be spending my Saturday at 8 a.m. is eating a bunch of eggs with a bunch of old dudes that smell like socks. I don't want to do that. Okay. But taking that event and then just opening up the basketball court ahead of it or having some video games open. So like, I'll chill for 15 minutes. I'll do this. And then you still make me do the thing. You're going to get me there once. And then I'm never going to come back, right?
The phrase that I always think of when this comes up is you have one chance to lie to people. If you introduce your first, we'll just lead into the men's breakfast because it's already the bit at this point. If you have one men's breakfast and it's the first one and you want this to be the first of many and you flop, people are going to know. They're going to tell their friends. They're going to tell their communities. And they're not going to want to come out to future ones, no matter how much you do to try to bring them back. And that's not to say you can't re-earn their trust. However, the amount of trust that you have to re-earn after you lost it, it's massive. You have to do so much more work if the product that you present on the front end is not something that resonates with your audience.
Trust is a currency, man.
Yes,
and every time that you lie, you spend that currency, and it is incredibly difficult to earn it back. Just like you said, Zach.
Just to be abundantly clear, you might not have said anything on the flyer that was untrue. There was absolutely basketball at that event, and there was absolutely video games or whatever the heck that you had there in this hypothetical situation. But the fun, exciting event that you marketed as, the vibe that you were promising, was not that. And obviously we're picking on men's breakfast. I was getting in the comments, some people have good men's breakfast. I'm glad you do. I've never been to one. But you have to promote the product that you have, not the product you want people to think that you have, right? Jeez. And if you would like new people to show up, you need to take into their perspectives, not just in the marketing of the event, but of the planning of the event too, and the building of the product. Have those people in the room when you're figuring out how to get those people in the room, right? That's not always easy to do, but I think often we view marketing as sort of a silver bullet of just convincing anybody to just show up to whatever event that we're promoting. Good events, good products, you know, even outside the church world, good products sell themselves. You just need to tell people about them, right? So if you're finding that you're having to work hard, extra hard to convince somebody to show up to something they're apprehensive about, it's probably not the marketing in this case, though it could be. You might need to look into what it is you're trying to sell.
You remember Firefest, Caleb?
Yes.
It's like, that's a perfect example of incredible marketing. That, you know, literally got people there, right? People were there, and the whole thing behind it, the product was not what was marketed.
It became the infamous low bar for production events. There were so many people that were wealthy and empowered who were drawn in by the inspiration of this event that showed up, and it became a disaster as people had to live in tents, as there wasn't enough food, as there wasn't enough transportation. I mean, you got to be careful with that.
Listen, apparently Firefest 2024 is a thing. They're bringing it back. So apparently they didn't bomb that hard.
Oh my gosh. Well, guys, I know we're nearing the end of the conversation today. I was hoping for, I mean, this is a from the hip, but I've heard multiple times today, focus groups. Maybe a little bonus thought, because I haven't really been involved in many focus groups, but Caleb, you and Nick both have. Do you guys have like the 3-minute pitch for how focus groups can help benefit this conversation about how to make more marketing ads that don't suck?
I think every single one of us has blinders. We are only privy to our own perspectives, right? And it's very hard. I know, like, I design logos for people all of the time. But when it came time to design logos for me, for Blackbar, for other of my own things, it becomes very hard to understand what someone else could be thinking of the things I'm making. And that's where focus groups come into account. You want to fill the room with a bunch of people that you trust can actually be honest with you. That is not the room for yes men, right?
Yeah, no, not at all.
You want to find people who can be honest with you. You need to find people who are exactly the people that you want in the room. I would get, using another marketing term, you want the sneezers in the room. These are the people who are taking your idea, your culture, whatever, and sending it out to other people. You want the most popular kid at the youth group, or the people who are, and all that type of things. You want to get them into the room and be able to pitch your idea, but also take notes, because your job in that meeting is not to say, hey, I think you guys should come to that event. It's to hear where you're not communicating properly, or perhaps where the event itself is missing the mark. It's not your event, it's theirs. You're just throwing it, right? So you got to make sure that you're in line with what it is they're looking for. Otherwise, I don't know, what are we doing here, right? It's not going to be worth it.
Can I just say, I hate that the terminology for them is sneezers.
I know.
That's the worst.
Well, I know. It's a viral
2020.
It's a viral idea, so they're sneezing. Yeah.
Right, that's why they're sneezers.
It's not my thing. That's just what they are.
No, that was someone else. Blame Seth Godin. He probably came up with it.
No, don't blame Seth Godin. Don't put that on that guy.
The brief I would say about Zach is, if you want to know what your target demographic wants, you have to ask them. And if you don't, at best, you're going to take a guess. At worst, you're operating in ignorance.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Wow. Cool, guys. As we land today, any other final thoughts about our conversation today? Pretty good. We made it through.
I'm happy. Yeah, we did it.
If the live stream crashes and burns that hard again in the beginning, I don't know what I'm gonna do.
Listen, we'll start a GoFundMe for Caleb. He's gonna need some extra help.
You can just give me money. That's fine.
Live stream recovery. Money. Wait, I got it. It's the support Caleb in his live stream trauma and men's group trauma GoFundMe. It's a combination trauma for helping Caleb process what he's going through. So, guys, as we land today, first of all, huge thanks to those who were able to join us today. We love hearing the comments from you guys. Please continue to do what you're doing down there. I think we had some spicy comments today, and I love that. Keep commenting, whether it's live or after the fact. Make sure to comment below, and we'll do the best that we can to connect with you, to get back to you. Of course, like and subscribe to our content. And then, of course, throughout the week, the following Monday or Tuesday after every broadcast, you can listen to this on all of our podcast streaming sites. Finally, if you are interested in taking this conversation further, if you like what we had to say and would like to have more of a digital at-length conversation, please join us over at the Discord at discord.blk.bar. And then finally, if you need our help marketing your content to make sure that your ads don't suck again, let us know. You know where to go. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today for episode 4. And until next time, this has been the Blackbar Podcast.